Hello, welcome to the channel. Subscribe, leave a like, and don't forget to write a comment. Enjoy watching.
Every holiday was like a rerun of a show I never wanted to watch, but couldn't seem to turn off. The same plastic smiles, the same clinking of wine glasses over dry turkey and overcooked green beans, the same forced laughter at the same tired jokes that should have been buried with my great Uncle Frank. And without fail, just as I'd get halfway through chewing a piece of mashed potatoes, carefully avoiding the conversation about politics or who got Botox this year, there she'd go, like clockwork. Aunt Deborah would lean across the table with that thin-lipped grin, her voice syrupy and loud enough for everyone to hear, and drop the annual grenade. "So, Melanie, when will it be your turn?" And then the silence would swell, that loaded, suffocating silence, followed by the polite chuckles of people too afraid to say what they really thought and too bored to defend me. It wasn't just a question. It was an accusation dressed in holiday cheer, a reminder, served alongside cranberry sauce, that I had failed to meet the only benchmark that seemed to matter in my family: marriage. Not career, not happiness, not peace of mind, just whether I'd managed to drag a man down an aisle and say the magic words. I used to laugh it off, playing the good sport. I'd say things like, "Maybe next year, Aunt Deb," and force a smile as if the comment didn't leave a bruise that would sit with me for days after the holidays were over. But this year, I didn't even bother faking it. I just looked at her, slow and hard, and let the silence eat her words alive. The thing is, it wasn't just Aunt Deborah. She was just the mouthpiece for a whole choir of whispers and pitying glances. My mother, Linda, tried to be subtle, but she was no better. Her, "Have you talked to that nice dentist lately? And you should come to church again, lots of nice men there." Lines were dressed in concern, but reeked of desperation. She never said it outright, but I could see it in the way she looked at my cousin Rachel. Married at 24, mother of 2, living in a big house in Alpharetta, and then looked at me, as if I'd somehow missed the train to normalcy, and boarded one to permanent disappointment. Rachel, of course, had announced that she was expecting her third during dinner, right after the pie had been served, and just before Aunt Deborah launched her favorite missile at me. There was clapping, there was cooing, there was my mother wiping tears from the corners of her eyes, as if Rachel had announced she was curing cancer, not just getting knocked up again by the same smug husband who never looked away from his phone during dinner. I sat there quietly chewing, wondering how many more times I'd have to show up to these events and play the role of the family's designated spinster. Later that night, after the dishes were done and the house had emptied of its guests and ghosts, I sat alone in my apartment, wine glass in hand, scrolling through Facebook. Weddings, babies, engagement rings the size of small moons. Captions like, "Can't wait to spend forever with my best friend," and "blessed wife life," floated past like tiny daggers, each one slicing a little deeper than the last. And even though I knew most of it was performative garbage, curated snippets of lives edited to look prettier than they really were, I still felt it. That ache in my gut, that shame I couldn't quite shake. And then, like divine spite, up popped a photo of someone I went to high school with, Amanda DeWitt, who used to cheat off me in biology. Wearing a lacy wedding gown in front of a sunset so fake-looking it had to be filtered within an inch of its life. There she was, clutching a bouquet, kissing her new husband like she'd just won a prize. And I don't know what came over me exactly, but I remember the exact thought that crossed my mind. What if I did it too? What if I just faked the whole damn thing? It started as a joke, honestly, a petty wine-fueled fantasy. I imagined Aunt Deborah's face if I showed up next year with photos of me in a wedding dress, smiling like I had nothing left to prove. I imagined the cousins gossiping behind their phones, speculating about the mystery man. I imagined the silence at the table when I'd casually mention my intimate ceremony and how we wanted to keep things private. I sipped more wine and laughed to myself, feeling a strange, giddy thrill. I knew it was ridiculous. I knew it was insane. But it didn't feel insane. It felt liberating. At around midnight, when the wine had turned from a comfort to a confessional, I opened my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I saw his name, Jay Holden. A guy I'd met a year ago at a friend's birthday party, an up-and-coming photographer who did everything from headshots to moody engagement shoots in downtown lofts. We'd exchanged numbers once after chatting about art and dogs. I'd never actually used it, until now. I stared at his name for a long time before typing, "Hey, you still do photography?" Then after a beat I added, "I have a weird idea. You in?" And I swear to God, I felt more alive in that moment than I had in the last 5 years of Thanksgivings combined. When I walked into that bridal boutique on Peachtree Street, the air smelled like soft perfume and nervous lies. The kind women tell themselves when they say yes to a dress and pretend they're saying yes to forever, and for a moment, I wondered if anyone could see straight through me. If the sales associate with the practiced smile and clipboard would sniff out the fraud in my posture, would recognize the absence of a ring, the lack of excitement in my eyes, or the emptiness in my tone when I said, "I'm getting married next month. It's kind of last minute. I need something special." And God help me, she didn't flinch. She lit up like I'd said something sacred. I had expected to feel awkward, maybe ashamed, or at least embarrassed. But what hit me instead was a strange sense of control. Like I was walking onto a stage where I finally got to write my own script, where I didn't have to sit at a dinner table and absorb everyone else's version of my failure, where for once I could stand in the spotlight and not feel like a cautionary tale. The woman, her name was Brenda, I think, pulled dresses with a kind of reverence, moving like a sommelier selecting vintage wine, and each time she asked about the wedding. "Is it outdoors or indoor? Big or small? Traditional or more modern?" I answered like I'd rehearsed it, spinning this fantasy life out of thin air, not because I needed to fool her, but because it felt good to hear myself say the things no one ever imagined I'd say. I tried on 4 dresses before I found the one that hit me in the gut, a satin off-shoulder piece with a subtle train and the kind of delicate detail that looked effortless but probably cost someone's mortgage. The mirror didn't lie, and neither did the lump in my throat when I turned slowly and saw a version of myself I hadn't expected. Elegant, composed, desired, even if only by my own reflection. For a moment, I forgot there was no groom, no vows, no church full of crying ants. I just stood there, half horrified at the lie and half hungry for the image, and when Brenda teared up and whispered, "You look like you were made for this," I smiled, not because it was true, but because for once I didn't feel like I had to apologize for existing in the room. Jay met me the next afternoon outside an abandoned mansion in Roswell that he'd scouted years ago for some moody lifestyle shoot. And as I stepped out of the Uber in my wedding gown, the look on his face was half amusement, half concern, like he'd just realized he'd agreed to help someone mid-mental breakdown. He didn't say it out loud, though, just raised an eyebrow and said, "This is either the best idea you've ever had, or the one we'll laugh about in a psych ward someday." To which I replied, "Probably both," and we got to work. The house was haunting in all the right ways, with broken shutters and peeling paint, and a giant wooden staircase that looked like it once carried grand dreams and now carried only dust and shadows. But against that decay, I looked luminous, like something stolen from a magazine or a memory. And Jay knew how to catch the light just right so that I glowed. Not like a bride on her big day, but like a woman stepping into a version of herself that no one else had believed in. I posed with the bouquet I'd bought from Trader Joe's that morning, held it tight like it meant something, gazed out windows like I was waiting for someone who wasn't going to show, smiled like someone in love with a ghost. And when Jay asked, between shots, "Do you want a few with a veil, or is this more of a rebel bride look?" I said, "Veil, all in." And when we were done, when I was back in my sweats and he was packing up his lenses, he looked at me sideways and said, "So what's next? Gonna post them?" And I could tell by the way he asked that he was genuinely curious if I was serious or just playing out some private performance art. But I looked him straight in the eye and said, "I'm going to post them, and I'm going to title the album Finally Chose Me. And then I'm going to sit back and watch the world burn just a little." He laughed, but there was a tightness in it, a flicker of concern he tried to hide. "You ready for what happens after that?" he asked. And his voice wasn't teasing this time. It was quiet, deliberate, like he knew something about this kind of revenge, like maybe he'd seen someone spin a lie so well they ended up tangled in it. I hesitated, not because I doubted myself, but because part of me wanted to say no, to confess that I was scared of being exposed, of being mocked or pitied or worse, forgotten. But instead, I said, "I've spent years being invisible. This is the loudest I've ever felt, so yeah, I'm ready." That night, I went through the photos one by one, each one more stunning than the last. And I didn't see the lie. I saw the woman I wished the world had seen earlier, before the bitterness had taken root, before I'd learned to armor myself with sarcasm and silence. I uploaded the album, gave it the title without hesitation, and paused with my finger above the post button for a long second. Not because I wasn't sure, but because I wanted to savor that moment right before the wave hits the shore. And then I clicked. The thing about fire is that it doesn't always start with an explosion. Sometimes it begins with the faintest spark, an innocent flicker that most people miss, until the smoke is already creeping under the door. And that was exactly how it felt when the first comment appeared under the album I had titled, with a wicked kind of sincerity, "Finally chose me." It was from a distant college friend, someone I hadn't seen in over a decade, and she simply wrote, "OMG, I'm crying, so happy for you," with so many exclamation points I could almost hear the forced excitement through the screen. Then another popped up, this time from my coworker Linda, who wrote, "You kept this so quiet. Gorgeous bride. Wishing you both a lifetime of love." And then they came faster, like a dam cracking under the pressure of collective curiosity. Who's the lucky guy? When did this happen? How did we not know? The post had been live for less than 10 minutes, and already my phone was vibrating like it had developed a nervous tic. I sat there on my couch, in the same sweats I'd worn for 3 days, a half-eaten sandwich on a paper towel beside me, watching as people I barely remembered from high school flooded the comments with shock and congratulations, and not so subtle attempts to gather intel. What amazed me wasn't just how fast it spread. It was how unquestioningly people accepted the narrative. I had posted no groom, no date, no details, just me and a dress that didn't belong to a story they'd heard before. And yet they filled in the blanks with the kind of romance they were desperate to believe in, because maybe, just maybe, the girl who'd always sat at the wedding table alone had finally been chosen. Then the text started. At first they came in soft and curious, like Rachel's message, which simply said, "Wait, did we miss something?" accompanied by a line of question marks that told me she was trying to keep it light, but was internally spiraling, trying to recall if I'd ever mentioned someone serious, if she'd missed a clue, if this was somehow a dig at her perfect life. I didn't respond. I just let it hang there, unanswered, because the silence was part of the performance, part of the illusion that something sacred had happened, and I was simply too blissful or too mysterious to share the details. Then my mother called. The sound of her name lighting up my phone screen sent a strange jolt through me, equal parts dread and anticipation. I knew she'd be angry, not because I had gotten married in secret, but because I had done something big without her knowing, without giving her time to prepare, to control the narrative, to spin the story in a way that made her look involved and important. I let it ring 4 times before I picked up, trying to control the shake in my voice. "Mom?" I said, trying to sound casual, as if we weren't both aware of the social bomb I'd just dropped. "Melanie Ross, you better tell me what the hell is going on," she snapped, and I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because her tone was the exact blend of panic and rage I had predicted down to the syllable. "I posted some photos," I said slowly, as if explaining it to a child, and she shot back, "Don't play dumb with me, young lady. Everyone is calling me. Your Aunt Deborah is already writing a Facebook status about how heartbroken she is that she wasn't invited. What is this?" I paused, then gave her the line I had practiced like a monologue in front of my bathroom mirror. It was an intimate ceremony. We didn't want a big fuss, just something for us. She inhaled sharply, probably calculating all the family damage this secret wedding would cause. How she would have to answer for it at church, how she wasn't part of the planning, how none of this had been filtered through her lens of social appropriateness. The silence that followed was thick and electric. "Who is he?" she asked, quieter now, and I let that question settle between us like a slow-rolling thunder. "He prefers to stay private," I replied. My voice steady, and it wasn't a lie exactly. It was just the kind of truth that wore someone else's clothes. She didn't argue, at least not out loud. She hung up soon after with a tight, clipped goodbye, and I imagined her dialing Aunt Deborah immediately, the two of them piecing together theories like it was a true crime podcast. By that evening, my inbox was a mess. Invitations to bridal brunches, questions about registries, women I hadn't spoken to since college messaging me with, "You give me hope." And I wondered, not for the first time, how easily we all fall in love with illusions. I scrolled through my own album again, looking at the photos not as the woman who staged them, but as a stranger, seeing a bride who looked radiant and peaceful. Standing in cracked sunlight with no groom, no ring, just confidence and a bouquet of white roses. And I realized something that both thrilled and unnerved me. People didn't want a story to be true, they just wanted it to be beautiful. And somewhere between the flattery and the madness, between the congratulations and the confusion, I saw Jay's name pop up on my screen. "You really did it," his message read. "People are losing their minds." Then another, "You okay?" I stared at those two words for longer than I should have, because the truth was, I wasn't sure. I felt empowered, yes, but also hollow in a way I hadn't anticipated, like I'd finally yelled loud enough to be heard, but still wasn't sure anyone was listening for the right reasons. Then came the knock at my door. I wasn't expecting anyone, and I almost didn't answer, but something in me shifted. A pulse of anxiety or curiosity, maybe both, and when I opened it, there she was, Rachel in her perfect skinny jeans and her carefully casual ponytail, looking like she hadn't slept. "Tell me the truth," she said, stepping inside before I could stop her, her voice trembling with something between fear and fury. "Who is he, Mel? Who is the guy?" And in that moment, with her standing in my apartment, eyes wide and desperate, I understood what had really begun to unravel. It wasn't just a joke anymore. This wasn't just about revenge. This was about something deeper, something broken. And I had just lit the match. There was something oddly satisfying about the way Rachel stood in my apartment doorway. This woman who had never arrived unannounced, never looked uncomposed, and certainly never let herself tremble in front of me, clutching her oversized purse like it was armor. Her lips pressed into a thin, uncertain line, her eyes darting across my living room as though searching for clues, for evidence, for any trace of the mysterious groom she had missed in her otherwise perfectly curated family life. And I realized then, not with arrogance, but with a strange sort of clarity, that I had cracked something open in her that not even 3 kids and a photo-perfect husband could protect. I didn't speak right away, choosing instead to watch her come apart slowly, the practiced confidence of her Instagram-ready persona peeling back one layer at a time as she stepped further inside, bypassing my half-folded laundry and takeout containers like she was too distracted to register the usual judgment she might have served in another context. And when she finally sat down, she didn't cross her legs like she always did, like our mother taught us to, but instead leaned forward with her elbows on her knees, fingers tangled in her own hair, and whispered, "Mel, please just tell me the truth. I need to know if I missed something, or if you're losing your mind." The silence in the room stretched between us like a rubber band pulled to its limit, and for a moment I considered giving her the clean version of the story, the one where I admit it was all a performance, a therapeutic middle finger to a family that had always measured a woman's worth by how many people she could gather under one roof in matching pastel outfits. But then I saw something in Rachel's face that stopped me, something raw and unfamiliar, a flicker of fear, maybe even longing. And instead of answering her directly, I asked a question of my own. Not because I needed an answer, but because I wanted to feel the ground shake beneath her for once. Do you remember Jay Holden? Her reaction was subtle but immediate. Her back stiffened, her mouth opened slightly as if she were about to deny something, and then slowly she nodded. Her voice barely audible when she said, Yeah, of course, from Kara's birthday party a couple years ago. I didn't respond, just let the air go still around us until she finally filled the void with a confession I hadn't seen coming, a truth that shifted the shape of everything I thought I understood. I used to talk to him, nothing serious, nothing happened. But he messaged me for a while after that night, said I seemed lonely in a pretty cage. I never told anyone, not even Matt. I didn't breathe, not out of shock, but because suddenly everything about her, her pristine life, her incessant bragging, her well-timed announcements at family dinners, made a new kind of sense. She hadn't been living in paradise. She'd been maintaining a prison, polishing the bars so no one would see the cracks. And somehow, the man I had dragged into my petty, symbolic wedding revenge had already played a brief but revealing role in the unraveling of her carefully constructed narrative. What do you want from me, Rachel? I asked, my voice level but laced with a weariness I hadn't noticed creeping into my chest. You came here for answers, but I think what you're really asking is if I got something you didn't, if I found a way out. She looked away then, blinking hard, and for the first time in my life, I saw my cousin not as the enemy, not as the perfect one who got all the praise, but as another woman gasping for air, under the weight of a performance neither of us had auditioned for. She didn't deny it. She didn't scream or argue or accuse me of being cruel. Instead, she whispered, I think I'm losing it, Mel. I think I've been pretending for so long I don't even know what I actually want anymore. And when I saw your photos, I felt something. Not jealousy, just grief maybe, like you got brave and I got stuck. We sat in silence after that, the kind of silence that says more than any apology or confession. And when she left, she didn't ask again who the groom was or if the photos were real. She hugged me without a word and walked out like someone who had glimpsed another version of themselves in a broken mirror and wasn't ready to look too long. Later that night, I found myself staring at the photos again, not because I doubted my decision, but because for the first time since this whole thing started, I felt the heaviness of the story I had written, not just for myself, but for everyone watching. And then, as if summoned by my thoughts, a notification lit up my phone. Aunt Deborah had posted a new status, her tone predictably dramatic, full of wounded pride and maternal outrage, talking about those who forget their roots and the pain of being excluded by the ones you love. And I knew it was aimed at me, knew she was rallying the cousins to her side, painting herself as the victim of my selfishness. But it wasn't her that bothered me. It was the message that came next, from an unknown number. I heard you're looking for a planner. Congratulations again. We can work something out. My stomach turned. Someone thought this was real. Not a relative, not a gossip, but an actual wedding planner, reaching out to help finalize the lie. Before I could even respond, there was a knock on my door. And when I opened it, Jay was standing there, his camera bag slung over one shoulder, his expression unreadable. You need to tell them, he said, not with anger, but with something quieter, something heavier. Or I will. There is a particular kind of silence that settles over a room, when everyone inside it realizes they've been lied to. Not the malicious kind of lie that makes people rage or demand answers in loud, clumsy words, but the more intimate, bruising kind of deception that makes them feel foolish simply for believing, for wanting the story to be beautiful, for clinging to a version of you that you never actually promised, but also never quite denied. And that was the silence I walked into when I finally gathered them. My parents, Rachel, Aunt Deborah, 2 other cousins who lived close enough to show up in person, and even a few stray acquaintances who had found their way into the chaos out of curiosity more than concern. and stood before them not in white satin or curled hair or mascara thick lashes, but in jeans, no makeup, and the kind of calm that only comes after you've set fire to the whole damn narrative and are now watching what's left of it float quietly to the floor. I hadn't planned a dramatic reveal or a speech written in the middle of the night with trembling hands and poetic lines meant to soften the blow. I wasn't looking to turn this moment into another performance. The truth was, I didn't owe them a show, not anymore, not after spending a lifetime pretending to be fine, pretending to be patient, pretending to be a good daughter, a good cousin, a good woman who didn't mind the endless questions or the lingering pity in their eyes every time they looked at me and saw nothing but unfulfilled expectations wrapped in sarcasm and solitude. I didn't get married, I said plainly, my voice steady and low, and I watched as each face in the room contorted in its own unique way. My mother gasped audibly, as if the news had just physically struck her in the chest. Aunt Deborah blinked like she was trying to process a sentence in a foreign language. Rachel closed her eyes for a long moment, already knowing this truth but needing to hear it out loud to make it real. And the rest just stared, their expressions suspended somewhere between shock and offense, unsure whether to laugh, cry, or get up and walk out. There was no groom, I continued, letting the words land without apology or decoration. No ceremony, no vows, just a dress, a camera, and a moment I needed to create because, for once, I wanted to feel like I had taken control of my own story instead of just existing in the margins of yours. My mother was the first to speak, her voice sharp and thin, frayed around the edges with a kind of desperation that had less to do with disappointment and more to do with humiliation. Why would you do something like this, Melanie? Do you have any idea how this makes us look? And that question, that specific phrasing, that obsessive worry about how things looked, was the final confirmation that I had never actually been the problem. I had simply refused to keep pretending that everyone else's definition of success was supposed to be my destination. And now that I had veered off course, they were scrambling to find someone to blame for their discomfort. This wasn't about you, Paha, I said, not unkindly, but with the firm clarity of someone who had spent years swallowing her own voice just to keep peace at the dinner table. It wasn't about revenge or making a scene or embarrassing you. It was about doing something for myself for the first time, without asking for permission or validation or approval. I wanted to know what it felt like to be celebrated, even if it was only pretend, because real or not, that celebration was more honest than the way you've all treated me for the past 15 years. Aunt Deborah stood up then, clutching her purse like she was preparing to walk out in theatrical protest. And for once, I didn't stop her, didn't try to smooth the moment with a joke or a conciliatory smile. I let her feel the weight of what she'd spent years dishing out in passive-aggressive questions and offhanded remarks dressed up as concern. This family has always tried to love you, she snapped, her voice cracking, and I nodded because she wasn't entirely wrong. But love without respect is just performance, and I was done being part of that play. And then, as if the universe couldn't help itself, Jay appeared at the edge of the room, having slipped in unnoticed through the back door after my text, his presence quiet but grounding. He didn't say anything right away, didn't insert himself into the chaos like a savior or accomplice. He just watched, letting the moment breathe until finally, in the stillness that followed Aunt Deborah's exit, he stepped closer and said, "You didn't need a fake groom, Mel. You just needed to stop apologizing for being happy on your own." The simplicity of his words hit harder than anything I could have rehearsed. And though I hadn't asked for his approval, I felt a flicker of something unfamiliar in my chest, a kind of peace I hadn't known I was chasing. Some people left without saying goodbye, unable to reconcile the image of me in a wedding dress with the reality of me standing in front of them, unrepentant and unwed. Others lingered, awkward and unsure, asking quiet questions about what came next, as if this were still a story with a neat ending. But there was no bow to tie on this, no neat resolution, and I preferred it that way. Because real life isn't a rom-com with a kiss at the end or a moral lesson you can sum up in a line of Hallmark wisdom. It's messy and unpredictable and full of strange detours. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't finding someone else to complete your story. It's realizing that you were never incomplete to begin with. I walked outside into the early evening air, the kind that feels heavy with change, not because the world shifts suddenly, but because something inside you finally lets go. And as I looked up at the sky, I thought about all the things I had carried for years, the guilt, the shame, the pressure, the constant ache of not measuring up, and how none of them belonged to me anymore. And for the first time in 35 years, I didn't care who understood me. I finally chose me. Was I wrong for fooling them? Or were they wrong for never seeing me until I wore white? That's a question I'll leave hanging in the air, right where it belongs.